minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up a little bit on a question earlier in our first round, did you indicate you plan to seek criminal and civil penalties for wrongdoing?
Congressman, we do not, under our statute, have the authority to bring any criminal actions. What we are authorized to do, and in fact told to do by our statute, is if we uncover any conduct that we believe could be criminal in nature, we are to refer it to the Department of Justice, which I think is akin to what you
because
said to me.
Most of the people I represent, they resent the civil penalties without criminal penalties. They don't like to see the big rich people that exploited them buy their way out of this stuff. And I know the agencies like to levy the penalties because then they have it as revenue. It doesn't go directly back into the Treasury like it should. And I hope someday that Congress will have the political will to do that, because that's just right. There was some discussion earlier about the level of detail expected for your agency. And, you know, while there may be people in this chamber that would be glad to check out of a grocery store and have the cashier look at the basket and arbitrarily say, well, your bill's about $200 or whatever, most people would like to have a itemized receipt. You know, would like to. They don't need to know the ingredients that are in every item that they buy, but they'd like to have some kind of accountability for that. You know, accountability changes behavior. Bureaucrats that don't perform don't change behavior. You know, the SEC has over 200 lawyers. They handle an average of 600 cases a year. I hope that your attorneys that you've talked about to the chair about hiring will be capable of handling more than an average of a half a case a year. In the private sector, they carry a much greater load than that, and it's something else, I think, that makes the general public suspect. And speaking of general public suspect, again, I talked about the article in Judicial Watch that discussed the salaries that you began paying some of these new employees, and I noticed an intern was hired at $42,000 a year. I mean, most of the interns in our offices work for nothing. If all the agencies start paying interns that kind of money, we'll never get any interns to work for the experience, which is typically what they like to do. I noticed we had a new employee, $251,388, an associate director for consumer education. Now that's over 5 times the average household income for working people who play by the rules back in my district. How do I justify that? How can I explain that to my constituents as being reasonable?
Well, certainly to begin with, I worked as an intern for Senator John Glenn years ago, and I was unpaid, so I'm familiar with what you're describing. The salary levels for the Consumer Bureau are fixed by law by Congress, and we are required by law to have a comparable salary structure and benefit structure to that of the Federal Reserve. I believe that was done. I mean, Congress did it, so Congress would know better than I why it was done. But it was done, I believe, to make us comparable and competitive with the fellow federal banking agencies, so that we wouldn't consistently lose, you know, veteran and experienced employees to them. The other thing that needs to be understood is that, you know, the work that we do is attempting to oversee, again, the most sophisticated, the most you know, powerful and many of them very extensive financial institutions in our society, and we need to be able to do the kind of sophisticated work that involves examining, you know, banks with $1 trillion or more in assets, multiple.
Well, but this is for a consumer education associate director, over $250,000 a year. That doesn't pass a straight face test. And, and are you telling me that Judicial Watch was wrong when they said records show workers starting at twice the maximum pay specified by the Office of Personnel Management?
Again, we have broad pay bands, and we typically try to pay to the midpoint of our pay range, not at the very top. So I'd like to look at the particular instance that you're describing. But what I will say is we're required by law to have pay bands and a pay structure that is comparable to the Fed. As of last count, as I was preparing for this hearing, We, on average, are about 1% below the Fed in our pay bands, and we're about 4% below them in average salary. So we are complying with the law. That's what we're supposed to do. If you have concerns about individual positions or individual salaries, we'd be happy to take them up, go back and review them, and get your staff whatever information they need.
I have a lot of concerns and a lot of questions about them, but if the Fed has an assistant to the Director of Consumer Education that they pay over $251,288 a year to, I'd like to know about it. And if they do, I would bet it wasn't an employee who just started at that. If another employee made that in the Fed, I would guess they'd probably have been there a lifetime to accumulate that. I hope I'm right.
We'll go back and review that particular instance that you're noting. I assume that out of all of our employees, your staff has looked carefully, and if there are others that they want us to look at, we'll do that as well.
I've got a pretty good size file here. I
Okay.
just use that as an example. Thank you. My
Thank
time
you,
is
sir.
up.
Mr. Cordray,